Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this lovely Tuesday evening when you could have chosen to be outside. Jane Medwell is one of our trustees at BBKA. She is chair of E&H and an active member of her local association and branch. And she's here tonight to talk to us about queen rearing. So you'll take questions at the end, will you, Jane?
I will, yes.
Okay.
And can I just check before we go that you can see this?
Yes.
Okay, that's lovely. Okay.
Over to you.
Right, I'm going to talk about queen rearing on a small scale, but actually I think a better title would have been Sustainable Queen Replacement or Meeting Your Need for Queens. And this talk is aimed at our average member. Looking at the figures, our average member has got 3 to 5 colonies. So if apologies to those of you who want to get into queen rearing on a much larger scale, we have got talks about that, but this isn't one of them. So we go. This is my apiary. I am a beekeeper. I have had my bees up here. Well, I've had bees in Warwickshire since 1999, but they've only been up in this field where a very kind farmer allows me to keep them for 20 years. And that's myself and my son, and we keep the bees together. Although, let's be honest, he's been doing a lot of the work recently. I'm going through like those sorts. This presentation, I'm going to talk about why it's a good idea to raise your own queens, what we need to remember about the biology of raising queens. I think the most important step in any queen rearing program is selecting the parent stock. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to talk about simple ways to use your existing skills and equipment to raise the queens you need, because I have a personal objection to buying them. I've been keeping bees a long time, and it's a family thing. And I was always taught it was very unlucky to buy or sell bees. Also, I'm a beekeeper, so I'm mean. And we're going to talk about a simple way to raise queens from your swarm cells. So I'm sure that every one of you knows about swarm control, and a simple way to raise queens from emergency cells. So, if we don't wait for the bees to get a skinny on for swarming, how to raise queens without that. Okay. What I'm not going to talk about is these methods. You can see here on the left, we've got grafting, which is a very useful way of producing, 15 queens at a time. We've got nicots in the middle, and on the right is the Ben Harden method of raising them on a queen-right colony. You can see the large dummies made of corifluid. Those are topics for another talk, and we've already got one up on the site for the Miller method, which is probably one of the best ways of getting started with larger scale queen rearing, because it doesn't involve grafting. And to be fair, neither does the Nicot method. Okay, so first of all, this diagram on the right is the process of queen rearing: selecting your parent colony, raising your queen cells, getting those the queens hatched and mated, and then growing that colony. And I'm going to concentrate essentially on the first 3 when we get to the process. But why raise your own queens? Well, for a start, it's a national imperative. We have a Healthy Bees Plan 2030, and the 4 key actions include developing enhanced skills and production capability for queen rearing for beekeepers. And that doesn't mean the plan wants you all to be raising a dozen queens a year. What it does mean is that we'd like you to be raising queens in a way that's sustainable, so you can replace your own queens without buying in things, particularly bees that are not local or indeed might even be foreign. So if you have the capacity to raise your own queens and feel secure in that, then you don't need to get them from elsewhere, and you can be choosy and keep the queens you want and not the ones you don't. Why raise your own queens? Well, for a start, it's cheap. Your own queens cost you little, whereas buying in queens costs quite a lot of money. If you are going to buy in, please buy in from another local beekeeper, not from a dealer who has perhaps imported those queens or imported the generation directly before them. Sustainable queen production, producing your own queens, produces the queens that work best in your area, and I will come on to that. By producing your own queens, you get to choose the type of bees you have. All bees are not the same, as we know. You just need to look across half a dozen colonies and you might see very different characteristics. Some of those we want to carry on and some of those we definitely don't. If you produce your own queens, you can plan for the year, and crucially, not just plan for the season, but also think about how you're going to go through the winter. I think it would be really advantageous for everybody to go through the winter with a spare nucleus. If you've got 3 colonies and a nucleus, if come spring you need to requeen a drone layer, or you find you want to change a queen, you've got one already before you start your queen rearing for that year. And the risks associated with buying in queens are very real. At the moment, many queens, tens of thousands, are imported to the UK by one route or another. And yet we know that at least pests like Tropilelaps and small hive beetle are quite close to us. Tropilelaps is in Georgia, small hive beetle is in Italy. If bees with those pests are imported and they become endemic here, we will have massive problems. I don't know if you've seen Maggie Gill's talk about Tropilelaps. It's really worth watching. If you think Varroa is a problem, you've got no idea how bad Tropilelaps can be. It's a third of the size, it's almost impossible to spot, and it does a great deal more damage. So we really want to avoid the risks associated with importing bees. And it's very difficult if you buy from a dealer to know whether those bees have been raised from local bees or from something that was imported a generation ago. Now, there's also the issue of the sort of beekeeping you do. My beekeeping, I pride myself on working with the bee's life cycle. I mean, I do that in order to steal their honey, of course, which I do replace with sugar syrup, but I like to think that as far as possible, I do intervene to manipulate their life cycle. I get them to produce me additional queens. I will ruthlessly replace bad-tempered queens, but I think that all things considered, they live a relatively natural life. It's probably why I don't clip my queens, and they undergo open mating, which is natural and improves the genetic diversity of my bees. So I think that's very important for me. Because locally adapted bees confer enormous advantage on us. First of all, locally adapted bees are adapted to the conditions where you are. And they survive in those conditions, not just through natural selection, as we've heard about it in our O-level or GCSE biology, where, the survival of the fittest. In fact, your genes and our bees' genes are not an unchangeable blueprint. There's something called epigenetics. This means that certain parts of the genome can be turned on and off through 3 or 4 processes which mean that those bees are genetically responding to the environment. And so locally adapted bees are adapted at a genetic level, and that enables them to deal with the weather and climate where they are. And it may indeed, a study that I read about transmissible DNA, also confer greater resistance to viruses particularly, and some pests, which I think we'd all agree is very important. In fact, that article talked about messenger DNA, which is shared from bees with the larvae through the feeding that they do, when they are larvae. So actually having the right queens feeding, being fed by those larvae improves their adaptation to that setting. And of course, as I said, locally adapted bees are not bringing in pests and diseases. And I expect some of you will have had the experience of buying in a very different queen. I certainly, when I started beekeeping, tried out yellow queens. I think they might have been from New Zealand. And I found that if they were accepted by the colony, they were often accepted quite briefly and then superseded. And I think that's not unusual with bees that are where a queen is introduced that's very different to those bees, because the genetic code of that bee and the epigenetics of that bee will influence the honeybee gut microbiome, which in turn changes the hive odor of that bee and how easily it's accepted. So locally adapted bees confer some real advantages for the colony and for us as beekeepers. And in fact, some time ago, as long ago as 2015, Colos did a study, it's quite hard to track down, and looked at 621 colonies, and they classed them either as local or foreign, not necessarily overseas, genetic origins. And this was a study right across Europe in 11 different countries. And they found that the local bees survived longer, had a better temperament, produced more honey, and were adapted to the particular gene expression of some of the viruses. So these advantages are science-based rather than just being hearsay. Okay, back to queen rearing. What do we need to know about the biology of honeybees and the process of queen rearing? Well, first of all, I want to draw your attention to that little diagram. The process of queen rearing, that select, raise your queen cells, get your queen mated, and grow your little colony. Bee breeding isn't like breeding Cocker Spaniels. You can choose the female parent, but realistically, you can't control the male parent. And as I've said before, for me, it's quite important that my colonies live as natural a life as possible. So I see multiple mating as a big advantage in genetic diversity, and as ethically where I want to be as a beekeeper. So I wouldn't dream of buying queens that have been artificially inseminated, for instance, which I think is unnatural and exceeds my ethical limits. What you can do is make sure you don't think about queen rearing before you see drones in your colonies. Now, the drones in your colonies are not the drones your queen will mate with, because it's greatly to the advantage of the colony to have a degree of genetic diversity. So your queen will mate with 15 to 20 drones at a drone congregation area that hopefully are not related to her. And the little diagram here shows in orange at the top the queen, and it shows two alleles, two gene signatures, and one of them is what we call a complementary sex determination gene, and that's the orange one. And you can see the queen has that on one side because the queen will have the DNA of both her parents. Drones, of course, are haploid. They only have one set of chromosomes. And so if the queen mates with a range of drones, you can see that there are a range of possibilities. Now, directly below the queen, where the queen has laid eggs with one set of genetic information, they become ordinary drones. Where she's laid eggs that are diploid, where they both have the complementary sex determination gene, they become diploid drones and are not viable. The worker bees, the policing bees, will eat up those young larvae and make sure that they don't hatch. And that can produce a patchy brood pattern. But they do that to, it's a biological way of preventing inbreeding having an impact on the colony. It still has an impact on the colony because you lose some drones, but it stops inbreeding. In the other diploid workers, they may carry one sex complementary sex determination gene, but they won't carry two copies of it. Okay, so preventing inbreeding, multiple mating is really quite important in our queens. And more essential biology for raising queens, and I've taken this nice diagram from the new MBU publication, Starting Out with Bees, because it looked quite nice. I'm sure you all know that the egg is there for 3 days and then it hatches out to be a larva. So that day 4 is a very important day, because that day 4 is when the worker bees start feeding that larva, either to become if it's a fertilized egg, either to become a worker bee or to become a queen. And for day 4 to 8, if it's fed a lot of royal jelly, and it has to be fed often, it's fed 1,500 times in that time, rather than the 150 times a worker might be fed. So if it's fed a good deal of royal jelly, then it will become a queen larva, and it will pupate, and day 16 the queen will emerge. So the numbers to remember, I guess, are 4, 8 and 16, which is kind of like mathematically nice, isn't it? And here's a sort of a picture of what you might see at those days. As you know, when the eggs are laid, they stand up and then fall down and hatch out into little crescents. And on that picture that says day 3 to 4, can you see the top left larva, the little curve? That's what you would expect to graft. That's a day 4 larva. It's just going C-shaped, but it's not quite curled round. And day 4 to 8, we've got a great, I've peeled back the queen cells there, a great big pool of royal jelly. That is a really well-fed grub. And then day 8 or 9, look at that, a sealed queen cell. And that's what you want to create in order to raise your own queens. Queen cells are the currency of queen rearing. Just as an aside, we've always thought the royal jelly is the only important thing, but I did read a paper from 2015 that says that in fact it's also important that fertilized eggs that are going to become queens are not fed pollen or bee bread. So how do we get high quality queens? Well, we actually do know a lot about what a high quality queen is. Bigger queens have a larger spermatheca, so they can store more sperm, so they're able to fertilize their eggs for longer. They actually have more ovarioles and produce more eggs, and they also produce more queen mandibular pheromone, which is the pheromone that holds the colony together. And when they swarm, it holds it together as a swarm. When it's well distributed through the colony, they don't swarm. So bigger queens are better queens. Colonies headed by queens that have been dubbed bigger, the ones that are dubbed high quality, have longer abdomens, weigh more. They create 34% more worker comb, and 144% more drone comb. And this was in a study comparing queens, bigger and deemed less big queens. And colonies headed by high quality queens had about 41% more workers than the low quality queens. So we can actually work out what high quality queens are, and that's what we want to go for. And this is a diagram from the apiarist.org, who has got some wonderful, David Evans has got some wonderful articles on this that I commend to you. And what that diagram shows is that the queen starts feeding royal jelly, starts being fed royal jelly at day 4. And the later the feeding starts, the poorer the queen. And that's been known since 1971. So when the bees have vertically orientated cells, by which I mean queen cups, the queen is fed more royal jelly. If that queen is lost, the bees will re-engineer a worker cell to make it vertically orientated and then feed it royal jelly. We call that an emergency cell. So the point is, the later royal jelly feeding starts, the poorer the queen. So we want royal jelly feeding to start as early as possible. And we know that what makes that likely is vertically orientated cells, queen cells. The eggs that become queens, we have always assumed until a flurry of research in the last 6 years that all eggs are pretty much the same. But in the last 6 years, we're starting to reevaluate that because of some of the studies. We found that queens lay, I say we, I wish it was me, but in fact, it was Way et al., who found that queens actually lay larger eggs in queen cups than they do in worker cells. And that is, I don't know the mechanism of that. I don't know whether the queen just sort of crosses her legs and waits a bit, or I don't know how she does it, but she definitely lays larger eggs in those queen cells. And the queens reared from the eggs laid in queen cells are heavier, with a larger thorax, more areoles. When they become fertilized queens, they lay more eggs and they produce more brood than queens laid in worker cells. So what I'm saying to you is, bees choose to lay the best eggs in queen cups, and eggs laid in queen cups become high quality queens, or more likely to, than eggs laid in worker cells. So let's look at the types of queen cells we can get. Okay, this picture, well, I don't know what sort of queen cells you think those are. What we've got on the left are actually swarm cells. There's only a couple of them, but they are often at the edge of the comb because the queen mandibular pheromone in a congested colony doesn't always reach that far. The ones in the middle, some people would call them supersedure cells because they're on the face of the comb. But in fact, if they're in May, I personally would not take the risk. The ones on the far side are, on the right, are emergency cells. They are the ones where the bees have had to reorientate the cell to make it hang, and they've made it out of a worker cell. Okay. So what I'm going to say to you is that you can either use swarm cells, we've got some swarm cells on the left, or emergency cells on the right, cells that have been made in response to being queenless, to create replacement queens. And I'm going to give 2 methods. So, queen rearing, whether you're doing it by my 2 simple methods or whether you do it through one of the more sophisticated methods that raise dozens of them, is this simple process. You select the bees you want to produce the queens from. You manipulate the colony to produce the queen cells. You get the queens hatched and mated, and then you grow them into full colonies. The things that will limit you are what sort of stock you've got. So if, as on the left, you've actually got Langstroth hives, but you've only got, and you've got great big prolific colonies of bees, but you actually want rather more small colonies of bees that will work in, say, a chilly, windy, northern sort of area, the stock available to you could limit you, because you can only go for the traits that are evident in the parent colonies, can't you? The range of equipment will make a difference. If you've got Langstroth hives, but your newt boxes are all nationals, that might limit you. And the number of bees you've got. You are going to need to use some bees to raise those queen cells. So I'm only going to talk about methods that don't involve grafting. Use your existing boxes, nukes and skills, because I think these are preferable for smaller scale beekeepers, and they're simple. First of all, select your parent stock. And at this point, I want to put something in here. Only breed from healthy colonies. Somebody asked me the other day, I think one of my colonies has got chronic bee paralysis virus, but the queen's still there. Do you think I could breed from her before the colony collapses? No, don't touch it. All your queen rearing stock must be disease free. Do a full disease inspection before you use it for queen rearing, and that's whether or not you're getting the queen from there. If you're going to use bees from there to raise your queen cells, those need to be healthy too. So I do a full disease inspection as my second inspection of the season. And you need to know the characteristics you're selecting for. And on the right, there's a picture of my rather not impressive records. This is where you need to consult your records, because you think you'll remember, but you'll be surprised you don't remember. Now, for me, I have preferences. The two in red, I select for a nicest temperament and a moderate colony size. I don't want great big double brood box colonies, and I don't want bees that are too frisky. But some people value the other things more. So it's up to you. You can select. I don't care about the type of bee. I just want a fairly local bee. Mine are all local mongrels. So, how do you select? Well, you ask yourself, first of all, is it a swarmy colony? I might not use swarm cells from that one. It could be swarmy just because it's too big for its box. It could be that I wouldn't raise queens from a swarm I'd got and I didn't know where it came from, because I wouldn't have had long enough to know what they were like. If they throw casts, I wouldn't really want to raise from that colony. So, are they swarmy is one thing I'd be considering. And then I would look at the records. Ideally, you'd have more than 1 year of records, but, a good year of records will help you. And my hot tip is not to use the numbers. I rate my colonies by a 1 to 5 scale, okay? So I record the number of brood frames and the temperament. So if they get a 5 on temperament, they get squished and replaced. If they get a 1, they're very, very good. So if you look at the little graph at the bottom, I've just been through a year's records, and you can see that the number of frames of brood is quite high. These bees have had, been a good strong colony. In the middle is a sudden dip where I did a shook swarm, but they bounced back really quickly. But you can see that the score for niceness is low, and that's what I want. And I can see it much more easily by doing that little grid than I can by trying to read the numbers. it doesn't work out averaging the numbers. It does work out plotting them out. So my first method, having discovered from the research that swarm cells are likely to produce better queens, is to think, I'm going to raise some queens from swarm cells. And it's, as I told you before, bigger queens are better queens. Eggs laid in queen cells are bigger, and turning those eggs into queens by feeding royal jelly preferentially happens to eggs in queen cells. So logically, swarm cells are good ones to go for. So what do? Well, it's very simple, isn't it? You select your colony first of all, not just any swarm cells. They have to be from the colony you want to breed from. And at some point, you stop offering them more space. Now, I inspect my bees every 7 days, and that way I will at some point see some open queen cells. And all I do is my usual swarm control and make up some nukes. It's easy. I get to keep my old queen in situ, and then I can use the rest of the queen cells from that colony to make enough queens to replace the queens that I want to replace, or perhaps give some to beginners. What do you need to do it this way? Well, I'm going to do a Pagden, so I need a box of drawn comb or foundation. I always use foundation because I don't like keeping drawn comb through the winter. I always feed when I do this because, weirdly, I think feed gets them to draw out wax much, much quicker. And I use nucleus boxes or apiaries, and I'll show you the difference. And the syrup is because I feed. We need that. This is my favourite bit of kit for this activity. These are split nuke boxes. You can see one newly arrived in my hall on the left. It's got a board down the middle, and so I can have 2 3-frame nukes. And the feeder on the top, there's a bung for that hole. The feeder on the top means I can feed my 2 3-frame nukes separately. In the middle is what they really look like, because I paint them with olive green Santex extra smooth masonry paint. And on the right, you can see I've got that box with 2 3-frame nukes in. And when I work it, I have a tea towel for each nuke, and I cover up one nuke while I'm working the other, so that they don't mix up while I'm working them. Okay, so I like those because they use the same size frames as my colony that I'm trying to get to produce swarm cells. And you know how to do swarm control, in this case a Pagden, or taking out a nuke is much the same principle. So you use the knowledge to produce multiple queens. You pressure your colony to produce swarm cells by stop adding supers, and you inspect every 7 days until, lo, you have some queen cells. Now, the number of queen cells the bees produced is a heritable trait. So some lines of queens produce dozens, and some produce half a dozen. You know, that's one thing you might think about when you select your colony. So let's think about how we do a Pagden. I move the brood box off the original site, and I open it up, and on the original site, I put a box of foundation. I take out some frames to make space, and in there I put the old queen and a frame or 2 of brood. Sometimes I just put 1 because I often do a sacrifice comb. And then what have I got left? I've got the old brood, because that's what you remove in a Pagden. So my queen is going to live on those frames of brood. The bees that are with her are going to pull out the foundation she's going to get laying. But the old brood is full of queen cells. So I'm going to close up my artificial swarm. Remember, the flyers are all going to go back there. So that will get on and do well. But the old brood can be split into, say, three-frame nukes with a queen cell in each. Now, hang on, there's 2 queen cells in one of those. I would reduce it to 1 myself. And for preference, I would choose an open queen cell where I could see the grub. And I would always feed those nukes, because remember, the flyers have gone. You've got lots of nurse bees in there, but no flyers. So feed them, and they will grow those queen cells, seal them, and then you can actually use those nukes for mating. And you can go away and clean your old box. I think I would space them out, and I would make sure that the entrances faced different ways, because remember, once the flyers are gone, the nurse bees have not been out flying, and they will make more queen cells, won't they? So by day 7, on day 4 to 7, I need to go back and check all those units and remove the new emergency queen cells they've made, because I want my best queens to be made from the original swarm cells. So I remove the emergency cells. And it's as simple as that. I always check both parts of a pagden, or in this case, the nukes and the pagden, because if there are eggs and young larvae, they will build more queen cells. If you have more queen cells than you know what to do with, you can add queen cells to another frame of brood and make up more nukes. This is a picture that Dave Bonner had of queens in tinfoil. The lightweight tinfoil that used to be around a Kit Kat was perfect, but now get the cheapest tinfoil you can. The plastic cages you can put queen cells in never seem to fit mine. And you can, of course, put them into, other nukes. Dave's got one there wrapped in tinfoil that's been introduced into a 5-frame nucleus. There's some foundation in there, but there's 3 frames of brood and stores. And on the left, I've got a queen cell wrapped in tinfoil that's been introduced into an apiaria there. Now, it's not as easy, but that queen hatched out perfectly well and was laying when I looked today. You could do 2 5-frame nukes and keep your original queen. But basically, this is a variation on your basic swarm control. And you would, once you've controlled the queen cells on day 7, this is putting, once you've controlled the queen cells, you leave them for 4 weeks for the queens to hatch out and mate. In fact, of course, if those are queen cells, it will be and they're not sealed yet, they will still have at least 8 days before they hatch, and then probably 3 to 4 weeks before they mate. So leave them alone. You can put spare cells into mini nukes. I use apiaries. It's not as convenient, to be honest, because you've then got all the old, where's the old brood gone? That's all been wasted. So I tend not to use the mini nukes when I'm using this method of creating new queens, but it's perfectly feasible to do so. And these are the mini nukes. You make them up 3 days in advance and put them in the dark, and they pull out the little combs and are ready to receive a queen cell after 3 days in the dark. If you're going to use mini nukes, I strongly recommend looking. This is Dan Basterfield's book. It's very good. And the apiaries.org has also got really good stuff about using mini nukes. So if you are going to use mini nukes, really look at the literature, because there's such helpful literature around. Okay, that's my preferred advice to people with 3 to 5 colonies, is to raise enough queens to replace the queens you want to replace, and to keep a nuke over the winter, by using swarm cells from your chosen colony. But you don't have to do it that way. Another method is to raise the queen cells from emergency cells, and that means that you do the split before they raise queen cells. So you don't want to wait for your bees to make swarm cells, so you do a bit of preemptive swarm control. They're not the very best eggs. They're started from older emergency larvae, but the key to any queen rearing is to have plenty of young larvae and well-fed nurse bees. The nurse bees are absolutely vital. So, how do I do it this way? First of all, preemptive split. Let's start by, you all know the nuke method. We'll start by removing the queen. So I select a strong colony and take out the queen with some brood and make sure she's got some stores and some nurse bees and make up a nucleus, basically. You can put in some foundational drawn comb. And I use the rest of the colony to make up nukes, maybe 2. Each nuke needs a frame of eggs and young larvae, a frame of sealed brood, a frame of stores, nurse bees, and you need to feed it. So I reckon that you can get 2 nukes out of a colony you've taken the queen out of. And basically, it's really simple. You simply feed them and leave them undisturbed. And for some reason, people recommend not culling any more emergency cells they might produce. And there's no advantage to going in to do that, because the cells you're going to use are going to be emergency cells anyway. Okay, your 2 nukes that you've made up don't have pre-existing queen cells in them. The bees are going to make queen cells in them when they realize that their nuke is queenless. So you open up your selected strong colony on day 1 and get your 3 nukes ready. Preserve your old queen and then make up 2 other nukes. That was me shaking nurse bees into each nuke. So there's a couple of frames of brood, one with eggs and young larvae, one with capped brood, and some stores in each of those nukes. And we're going to move them all, okay? And we're going to feed them all. So you've kept your old queen and you've got 2 queenless nukes, and they are going to make up emergency queen cells from the eggs and young larvae, which is why it's so important there are eggs and young larvae in both of those queenless nukes. And you're going to space them out facing in different directions, and they are going to rear themselves a new queen by about day 28. She may not be mated by then. You might need to leave it a bit longer. The biggest challenge in both of those methods is finding the queen. Now, what I've done here is I've taken out the stores frames and paired up the frames, because the queen is likely to go between one of those pairs of frames, and you can open them out, draw them out of the brood box, open them out, and she's likely to be between the frames. It's not infallible. But in fact, this second method of making up queenless nukes, it doesn't really matter. You can just make up 3 nukes. She'll be in one of those nukes. The other 2 will be queenless, and you just leave them to get on with it. Okay, the final step is getting your queens mated. When those queens hatch on day 16, or sometimes 17, they will take 5 days or so to mature, and then they will go on mating flights, and they will go on a lot of mating flights. It's not just one. And they will then spend 3 to 8 days once they're mated, maturing, and then will start laying. So it always takes longer than you think. Do not panic, give them a bit longer. And this is what we're aiming for in terms of mating. It's a lovely video from The Guardian. Watch for the drone clap. Look at that, the comet-shaped cloud of drones.
Drone dies during the mating ceremony. When the queen returns from her maiden flight, she keeps 5 million sperms in her sperm bank.
Well, I don't know about mating ceremony, but I think that's a wonderful video, and it was created by somebody with mini helicopters, apparently. Most queens will find a drone congregation area. It's actually amazing how drones find drone congregation areas, because remember, they've not lived over the winter. They've not had contact with previous drones, and yet they always find them. 90% of matings occur within 7.4 kilometres. Remember, the queens fly further than the drones in order to mate with drones that are not from their own colonies. And they'll mate with 15 to 20 drones. And some matings will be unsuccessful. So, there will be some times when the weather just doesn't allow for good mating. And that's why we get drone layers in the spring. But nothing's infallible. But, bees have been around for a long time. They're pretty good at it. So what can you do with your new queens? Well, give them away. If we try one of the bigger queen rearing operations like Nicots or set up a Ben Harden, we end up with loads of queens, so we can give them away. We can add frames of foundation. Some people keep drawn comb and can do that, and grow the colony to a full size. And we can overwinter a queen in a nuke as a backup. All good uses of spare queens. We can also put them in the freezer to dissect. And we can extract queens from those mating nukes and introduce them to a queenless colony in a cage like this. Or we can just unite a nuke with a queenless colony using a sheet of newspaper and a spare brood box. So I've gone on too long, sorry. The most important thing you must do is select which colony you want to breed from. I think that the research has convinced me that swarm cells are really good cells for queen raising, which goes against everything I've been taught in beekeeping. Emergency cells can produce good queens too, and all queen rearing methods that are not using naturally occurring swarm cells are using emergency cells. Bees raising the queen cells have got to be young and well fed. You need those nurse bees, and feeding helps because it takes one stress off them. It's vital to feed small queen raising nukes because they haven't got flyers. Raise and mate your queens in whatever boxes suit you. I like the little 3-frame nukes that have an entrance at each end and 2 feeders on top. But it's up to you. You could use bigger 5 or 6 frame nukes, or you could use little apiaries. Queens or cells can be introduced through direct introduction in cages or uniting. If you've got 2 or 3 colonies, you can raise your own queens, have a replacement program, and overwinter a nuke, or be the beekeeper you wish you'd met at the start and give one to a new newcomer. And I've put some resources up. The apiaries.org is simply the best beekeeping website out there. On BBase, there's an NBU Miller workbook. It's also on BBK Learning Online. And we have a spreadsheet on BBK Learning Online if you want to do Miller. And Dan Basefield's book on apiaries is unbeatable. And I've also got the references here for the research studies that I looked at to underpin this presentation. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I do hope there are some questions and I've not thoroughly confused everybody. And I also hope it's not too simple for you.
Thanks, Jane. That was absolutely brilliant. Richard, I think, has got a question. He's waving. Do you want to unmute and ask it, Richard?
It's all gone quiet. Oh no.
Oh, while we're waiting for Richard, shall we go to Aldrine? Have you got a question?
They need to unmute their... They're all unmuted.
I'm muted.
Go on, Aldrine, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Jane. So it's a very simple question. So a year, not 2 years ago, we have a very good queen. So anything that we bred from her, it's open mated. And anytime we got the queen from her, her temperament is really good. But anything that we got from her as a stock was really aggressive.
Oh, it's not infallible. That's the trouble. Bees are not cocker spaniels. Really annoying, Aldrine. That would, that is upsetting. It does happen. And that's why it is so important to be choosy and not just put up with the aggressive bees. Rear some more queens and replace them. Don't put up with aggressive bees because they're just getting into the gene pool, aren't they?
Yeah. So what we ended, or at least this year, what we ended up is we killed the aggressive queens and we got queens from people who have given up, and that's how we managed it this year.
That's a really good strategy. That's a really positive strategy. Local people.
Yep.
Well done, Aldrine. I think that's very positive. If you are getting queens from someone, try and get them from someone local.
Yep. So whoever is want to have more than one swarm cells, they want to donate. We have a WhatsApp group where we all put them, and we come over and collect them. So that's
what a good idea.
I wish it's a local database somewhere it is available, but it is not. So it's still on WhatsApp. Yeah, that's more than enough for us.
That's a really good thing for an association to do, isn't it? And it's a great way to help each other out, and let's face it, we all have spare swarm cells at times. Oh, there's a quick question here from somebody. Omar, what ratio syrup do I recommend? Weirdly, I recommend a 2-to-1 syrup, a heavy syrup, because it's a drawing out wax. But actually, I use an ambrosia because we have a branch cooperative and you never dilute ambrosia. So I just use the ready mix. Any other questions?
Caroline, I think...
Hello.
Hello, you're ready to speak now. Go on, ask your question.
Okay, thank you. I heard you say you're not supposed to feed the queen's pollen, so I was quite interested that they must only have royal jelly. So what do the nurse bees need to produce royal jelly to feed them correctly?
Oh, well, the nurse bees may well need the pollen to produce the royal jelly. We always need pollen if we're raising bees, but they don't feed it to the queen larvae.
Right, so all the royal jelly is produced by the nurse bees, is it?
Yes.
Understand. And how long do the bees last in an apidia before it's too late? Because I got an apidia and I also got a two double 3-frame nuke, which I've been playing with, and I loaded up bees, and then I didn't get a queen cell that was working. So one of them had 2. One of them still got some bees in, the others sort of didn't really work. I wondered how long you can keep it before you have to reload a new set of bees.
Well, what apodias speed up everything. In my experience, anyway, I find that you can't keep bees in apodias that long because they're so little, but they do mate faster, I think. And I also find that they go to laying workers much faster too. So if your queen cell doesn't hatch out, normally you wouldn't think of getting laying workers in less than 3 or 4 weeks. But in an apodia, if your queen cell, for some reason doesn't hatch, you will get laying workers really quite quickly. So yeah, everything's accelerated with the apodias, which is another reason why I like my three frame nukes.
And how many bees do you need to put in an apodia?
About 600, so it's 250 mils. If you use a milk bottle, you need a 1 litre milk bottle and cut it round the first line from the top. It makes a nice scoop. Books say a cup, but you're looking at about 250 mils of bees, about 600.
Thank you very much.
Caroline and Pete, I can't actually see anyone there. Do you want to ask your question? You'll have to unmute.
So I have one more question, Jane.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Margaret has his hands up before me, so I will keep quiet for her. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, Jane, thank you. That was a great presentation. Why are we not allowed to do that for our general husbandry? Why do we have to use the other forms?
I couldn't possibly comment, but remember that this is very recent research, Margaret, and it's game-changing research. I would never have suspected it. I have always been taught, I was taught by my mother, and some really, really good beekeepers have always said, do not rear queens from swarm cells, you'll get swarmy bees. And I have never examined that assertion. And only when I read all that research did I ask myself, well, what do I mean by swarmy bees? They're probably just in too small a box. And so it's that research program that has really changed my view and quite a lot of other beekeepers' views. And naturally, the syllabus for the general husbandry probably wants to make sure you have extensive skills. But it's very recent is why I think, Margaret.
Thank you.
Jane.
There's a couple of little questions here. I like Sam's question. How do you wrap the queen cell in foil? And the answer is very, very carefully. I cut it out with a super sharp knife, and you've always got to have a knife that's super sharp because you are always cutting it out of warmed wax, aren't you? It's not hard brittle wax because you've just taken it out of the colony. And the queen cells I cut out always have excess wax on them, and I can never get them slimmed down enough to put them in those plastic queen holders without ruining them. So I cut them out and wrap them in a little strip of foil and then squidge it together to make the shape I want.
Hello, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
It's Chris. You mentioned something with the queens in a freezer. I didn't quite understand what you meant by that.
The queens?
But putting them in a freezer or something.
The spare ones, you have that. You don't.
Oh,
want
sorry,
that
I was
to you.
joking. I'm part of a microscopy group. And so if I take a queen out and she is doomed, I don't squish her. I put her in the freezer because queens to dissect are at a premium.
Oh, right.
And I know if you've got a microscopy group in your branch, they would be very grateful to receive your dead frozen queens, because you don't often, one of the dissections you tend to learn to do is to float out the ovaries. So it's lovely to have a queen.
As it just occurs to me, can you use them as a kind of a lure? Would they still maintain?
That's a thought. They'd have to be mated. But I don't, while they're fresh, I'm sure you could.
Anyway, right. Thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. I hope to employ your methods.
Well, the thing is, the bees are very good at producing queens. So you can have a go and they'll probably get it right.
Right,
Well,
Pete's
I
unmuted
agree
now,
with you.
and then we go to Richard.
Cells are the best, aren't they? The full swarm cells are the best. There's no two ways about it. No two
Well,
ways.
that's what the most recent research says.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Thank you very
let's face it, I'm a dab hand at grafting, but I'm not as good at choosing a good larva as a bee is, am I?
Yes. So adding to your advice would be, I would try and put queen cups on the bottom of a frame and use that frame marked to see if the queen can lay in those cups, intentionally make cups there, and then, you know, if she's done
All
that.
over the country, beekeepers like me are experimenting with making little wax cups and seeing if we can attach them to frames and seeing if we can get queens to lay better eggs, and
Yeah.
because nobody's done that yet.
You need to take away the bottom bars. You need to take at least one of the bottom bars away so that it can fall nicely down, because the bottom bar is hindering it. Anyway,
we'll give it a go. Let me know how you get on.
Yeah, okay, you let me know. You'll be quicker than me. Right, I'm calling out on this. I give other people a try. Thank you.
If I can, a quick question, Jane. So one of my social apiary, most of them has buckfast. I am the only one who has a mongrel breed. And if I open mate them, would that have an impact on that, or?
It probably will have an impact, because if the area is flooded with buckfast, she's likely to mate with some of those buckfast types. But there are very few pure buckfast these days. Most of what people buy as buckfasts have come either from Denmark. Where else is the place that people get? They've come one generation away from Denmark. A lot of the bee breeders in the north bring them in from Denmark, breed up another generation and call them local. They are just a sort of a bigger, yellower bee, really.
Yep.
But yes, it is going to have some sort of effect. But unless you're in a very, very remote place, it's very hard to control the mating. And that's why being choosy about which queens you keep is important. I mean, all my bees, for example, run on the comb, which would annoy loads of people, but doesn't bother me. But they're not usually terribly defensive, and they are very productive. So I've sort of got to the sweet spot for me.
Mm-hmm. The most of my queens are skittish, but the colony itself is really calm. So except for one of the few which we bred on our own, or from the stock of the really calm ones, they are really calm.
Yeah.
So
that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it, is to choose for what you want. Be a bit ruthless.
Got it. And what would be the time frame that you suggest for culling aggressive bees? Because that itself is a huge endeavor, right? Because once you cull, you need to merge the colonies again.
Yeah.
So,
well, one of the things that I find is that that's another advantage for me of the 3-frame nukes. I honestly can't tell very easily in apideas. Whereas in the 3-frame nukes, I do get you've covered one side over with a tea towel, separate tea towel for each nuke, each 3-frame nuke, by the way, because hygiene, and you get through washing a lot of tea towels. If I go into 3-frame nuke and they're very defensive and the queen is already laying, I'm already thinking, might not want to keep this one. I think you can tell in the 3-frame. They've got to have been through a whole brood cycle at least, but you can keep them in the 3-frame nukes long enough to do that, whereas in the apideas you can't keep them that long.
got it. Okay.
Can we
So,
go to
and be
Richard
ruthless as soon as we know, that's what you mentioned. So as soon as you know they are aggressive, once you get the first brood going, cull them and merge them as soon as possible. Got it.
Yeah, and it's easy to merge them in those double nukes. You just remove the middle board. Richard, what were you going to ask?
Yes, you mentioned that in an apiaria you need to keep the bees in the dark. Wasn't quite sure what that meant. I was understood that you're supposed to put your bees in and then keep them in there closed, not let them out for 4 days, I was told.
That's it, yes, in a dark place. And you
Yeah.
spray them with water, obviously,
through
especially
the
in
ventilation, so they've got some moisture.
Yes,
Yeah.
they've got a special little vent in the top of the apiaria, and you
I
can
did
spray
that,
the water through that.
And well, I didn't get any drawn out anything, and I fed them. I filled it up with fondant and stuff, but I didn't see anything when it went wrong. I didn't see anything drawn out at all. So maybe I had the wrong bees in there. I'm not quite sure.
Well, what you do is set it up first with I put little well, actually, I get my son to do it. Little sheets of foundation, making sure it's the right way round, in the tiny little frames. Put them in, turn them upside down, put in me 600 bees, shut them, put them in the dark, spray them a couple of times a day, and then after 3 days, I take them out and open the entrance.
Okay, when you say in the dark, you mean literally in a dark shed sort of thing, so that they don't get any light through the ventilation. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. No, I didn't do that. Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's what happened. Right. And then after 4 days, you can let them out, right?
Yes. And there's two theories about whether you put the queen cell in when you make up the nuke, or whether you put the queen cell in after. I tend to put the queen cell in when I make up the apiaria, because I read that in Dan Basefield's book, and it is a very good book. And he does it professionally, and he knows what he's talking about, and it works.
I was told you could just drop it in the hole, and you don't need to.
Yeah, it's got a special little hole with a flap on, and you put the queen cell in the hole.
So you don't need to worry about which way up it is or anything. You can just drop it in, right?
Oh yeah, you keep it the right way up. It's got to hang down.
Okay, it's got to hang down then. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Somebody's asked here, could I tell them a little more about our beekeeping cooperative? It's just a thing our branch does where we buy in, I'm sure lots of your branches do, we buy in things like glass jars, we get ambrosia. We've just bought another 8 tons of ambrosia, which is a liquid feed. We get glass jars, foundation, ambrosia, fondant in the winter, and some varroa chemicals. And because we buy in bulk, we get a cheaper price. And because we're a charity, we don't make a profit on it. We sell it at cost. So we always say that our members make back their membership fee and what they save by being part of the co-op. But of course, it relies on willing volunteers, doesn't it? So some people do a heck of a lot of work in Warwick and Leamington to make that possible, and the rest of us benefit.
Hi Jane, I've got a quick question about your use of foil on queen cells. I've never seen that done before. Could you explain a bit more how you do it? Obviously, you wrap it in, but is it to protect the queen like you would in the hair roller type? And do the bees chew it open? Can you explain more how it happens, please?
Do you know, I had a photo of one that they'd opened up today. I wonder if I can find it. What we used to always say, use the foil from a Kit Kat, because it was a lovely thin foil.
Yeah.
And
so
you got a Kit Kat.
Sorry?
And you got a Kit Kat to eat.
And you get a Kit Kat. Yeah, exactly. You have to count your blessings in this life. But these days I buy Lakeland Extra Tough foil, and that's too tough, I think. So buy the cheapest foil, the cheapest, crappiest foil you can, and keep a sheet of it wherever you keep your beekeeping equipment. And then I just tear off a strip, and I think I've got a photo that I can show you. I just tear off a strip and literally, oh, here we are. This one's just come out of an apiaria. I tear off a strip and wrap it round. I'm just going to share the screen. Share. I tear off a strip, and you see that one has been in for a number of days, has hatched out.
Come up yet, Jane? Hang on, haven't come up yet.
Oh, can you see it now?
No, hang on.
I can see it.
Yeah.
Yep, it's loaded.
Hang on, no. Pinch out for a bigger view, it says. Oh, where's it gone? Oh,
What I've done is wrapped a strip round the queen cell,
Right.
popped it through that hole in the apodea, and
Yeah.
I've just hoiked it out there to check that she's hatched. And you can see that she has hatched from the bottom. You don't cover the tip up. That's absolutely vital.
Right.
You're just wrapping it round the upper part.
Right. Okay. So basically, the bottom of the queen cell's left open, exposed
Yes.
from the foil.
The bottom protrudes.
Yeah. Yeah. Not
Yeah.
protrude, but just leave it exposed so the bees can
Yes.
unlock it and open her up. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's exactly what I needed to know. Thank you. Yeah.
That's exactly that. And you can get these little plastic receptacles. I've got a whole huge bag of them that I've had about 15 years, which you're allegedly supposed to be able to drop a queen cell into, but my queen cells are never the right shape. So
Yes.
there we go. I shall have them probably for another 15 years.
I've got a couple of apideas and some hair roller type cells,
Yep.
but you say they don't always fit inside those hair rollers. So thank you. The foil might be their idea. And so you say leave the bottom open so the bees exposed. That's the important bit. Yeah, that's why that's like the main point of my question, how you use the foil. Thank you.
Jen, if you don't mind me asking a basic question, so why use it in foil? Is just to protect the queen from being damaged, right? Or
Yeah,
is there
it's
any other
just
reason
to
beside?
protect the top of the queen cell, and also it's much easier then for me to manipulate to get it through that hole, which is a little bit tricky with apideas. Also, if I'm putting it into a bigger nuke, for instance, often if I've taken a queen out of one of my 3-frame nukes and say given it to somebody who needed a queen, I give it to them in a queen cage with a few workers. I've now got a queenless colony, so I might have a swarm cell that I want to put in there. I cut it out, wrap it in foil, and the foil I can then use a cocktail stick through that foil without damaging the queen cell. It just makes it easier to put into whatever you want to raise your queen cell.
Won't she fall out the bottom of the foil though?
Sorry?
Will she not fall out the bottom of the foil?
Who? The queen cell?
Yeah, if it's just wrapped around the top of the queen, as it were, wrapped around the sides of the queen.
Oh, it's wrapped round in a sort of cone so that it's wrapped more closely towards the bottom.
Right.
So the wrapping is the same sort of shape as the queen cell, but it's just the bottom that protrudes.
Yeah. Okay.
Jane, can I suggest there's been quite a lot of questions about the use of tin foil on queen cells. Perhaps we should put together a little unit with some of your photos to explain everything for people.
Okay, I will take some more photos. Tin foil on queen cells.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. Thanks, Diane.
Surely there is also a risk, isn't there, that the queen cell might not actually be accepted by the bees you're putting it in with, and then they will tear it down and kill the queen. And it's always...
Exactly, Bruce. By covering the sides, they're much less likely to tear it down. Because it's this. I tell you what, though, this week I had some in an apodea. I have never heard such loud piping in my life. So I went into my shed and there's this weird noise. I said to my son, "What's that weird noise?" He said, "Oh, something mechanical, something squeaking." And in the end, we tracked it down to one of the apodeas, and the noise that was coming from that apodea. Here's me who always says, "I never hear the queen pipe." Well, you could have heard that one pipe from the next village. Yeah. And
I've actually seen a queen piping as well. I had a virgin out walking across the comb, and she stops and pipes and then moves on and stops again and pipes. And the other queens in the sealed cells were answering her in the colony. So,
amazing, isn't it?
Yes. Jane, could I just ask you, why don't you dilute ambrosia?
Oh gosh, because the manufacturer tells you not to. I don't actually know chemically, let's be honest, but
Right.
It's something to do with the inverted nature of the syrup. If you dilute it, it can go moldy, whereas if you don't dilute it, it doesn't go moldy. And that's one of the big advantages of it, is that I can keep it without having to worry. I don't like adding things like thymol and things. I never add anything to a colony unless I've got a good reason for it. And I know they can deal with the sugar syrup. I don't want to add anything to it.
Yes, I've only diluted mine because I was going on the theory of 1-to-1 representing nectar rather than a thick syrup. but you're happy that they can deal with a thick syrup.
Yeah, yeah. And giving them a little bit of ambrosia or any syrup just reduces the stress level, I think. So whenever I do something that's stressful, like a shook swarm or making up small nukes. I mean, the small nukes is absolutely vital because remember, they haven't got that many flyers.
Yes.
A feed just gets them off to a really good start.
Well, you're effectively giving them 3 meals a day without charging them, so it's fine.
Well, and it does, you know, take the stress and restore the balance in the colony as soon as they can.
Yeah.
Because you've unbalanced these little colonies, haven't you? So, you know.
Is there a difference between feeding a regular 2:1 versus ambrosia, especially for a very basic 3-frame nuke?
Well, the manufacturers might claim it, but I have to say my experience is no. And Randy Oliver did a study where he compared feeding with 1:1 and 2:1 he was doing it for swarm when you do swarm control. No, when you do shook swarm. I can't remember what he was doing it for. But anyway, he compared the effects of feeding 1:1 and 2:1 and commercial syrup. And although the patterns of the development of the colony was slightly different, it made ultimately no difference at all.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Of course you can.
How do you overwinter a 3-frame nuke? Or
I would probably grow it to a 5-frame nuke to overwinter.
Right, okay.
Although some people, look, Dan overwinters apiaries by putting an apiaria, by removing the integral feeder and putting extra frames in. So you can overwinter quite small colonies, but you do have to give them more attention and make sure they've got access to feed that they can use, which is not easy in the winter.
Right, because you can put one apiaria on top of the other, can't you? And
You can. But I think for overwintering, I don't use poly hives. This is weird and inconsistent, but I do use the poly nukes. And actually, I've overwintered many nukes in those poly 5 or 6 frame nukes, and they do really well. And that means that in the spring, if I've got a drone layer, I can do something about it. You know, it gets me off to a good start.
Okay, so you could overwinter. You could create 2 new queens in the 2 sides, and then overwinter just one in the whole box.
Yeah, if I'd created 2 in the 2 sides, I'd probably get another nuke, transfer one of the nukes into it, add some foundation, and as the season goes on, one of the challenges with nukes in keeping them is them having enough space, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, when you start with 3-frame nukes, if you're going to keep them a long time, you're going to need to give them more space or bleed brood.
Right. Thank you very much, Jane. That was really excellent. That was really useful for everyone, I'm sure. And I'd just like to say again, if everyone had overwintered an extra nuke, we'd be in a much better position to not have any imports, which has got to be good for our bees. So thank you very much, Jane. I can see some great comments in the chat as well saying thank you.
Well, a final thing is watch Maggie Gill's talk on Tropilelaps if you want to be really, really scared and depressed. But I mean, it's excellent, but it is, you know, really scary. Because if you can't see it, how do you know you're not importing it?
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Jane.
Oh, shall I just answer Liam? How long will a queen cell be viable after taking it from a hive? Well, some people raise queen cells in incubators designed for hatching out chicken eggs. So they, you put them into a hair curler. So they must be viable for quite a little while. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Jane.